Please welcome to the stage WWD's executive editor, Bridget Foley, joined by designer Narciso Rodriguez.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And Narciso, a giant thank you to you for being here. Pleasure. I know that you are maybe in a moment of downtime after having shown your show yesterday. So first, 3 levels of congratulations. Of course, the still new babies, congratulations.
Thank you.
Narciso is the proud dad of 2 gorgeous babies, boy and a girl. And the show yesterday and 20 years in business. So that's a lot to talk about right there. 20 years in business, of what are you most proud?
Surviving, staying relevant, staying engaged and interested in fashion and, evolving. I think when you start, you have a lot of passion, and it's like keeping that passion alive.
And talk a little bit about, well, we'll talk about the survival, but first I want to talk about the show yesterday. It's 20th anniversary. Some people do bells and whistles. You showed in a very quiet, very calm, I will use the word genteel manner. It was, for those of us who go to a lot of shows and experience the pushing and the shoving and the frenzy, it was the antithesis of that. Why did you decide, and the show was gorgeous, by the way, why did you decide to show in that manner?
I was in Europe and I went to the Saint Laurent's design studio, which is open to the public now, and everyone should visit if they can. And to see where he created and showed his work was really inspiring. And I don't know, I've always been driven and interested in the craft, and I thought it was a really nice opportunity to invite people into my atelier where we create the pieces, we design them, we make them there, and share them in a more couture-like setting. That can come off as a bit pretentious, but
doesn't sound pretentious to me at all.
But it's just so nice that you can be close to the work and see the materials and the amount of time that we spend on cutting everything and making everything. And I think it's a time where everybody's looking at the way that they show their work and do shows, because you can spend millions and millions of dollars on creating sets that...
And many brands do.
Big brands do, and I think it's really great to fly all the editors around the world for an incredible experience. But I find that in today to be so wasteful. Mm-hmm. When I see big sets that cost millions of dollars that are up for one day and then thrown away the next day, it's illogical. And it's not the way the world works anymore, and certainly not the way fashion works today.
Does fashion even work today? I mean, there's so much going on, so many levels. How do you think it's all going to play out?
Well, I think people who love fashion and clothing and beautiful pieces and beautifully made things, whether it's things for your home or to wear, will always appreciate the craft. Mm-hmm. and the energy that goes into creating something. So in a very rarefied way, it'll always exist. But it changes, fashion changed, in the 1900s with the machine age, and now with cell phones. And
do you think there might be, if not a refocusing, but there's so much about street and in fashion for everyone, and street has become such a huge impact on luxury. Do you think there might be a reversal where there's sort of more of a return to exclusivity in terms of, or maybe niche? Exclusivity has such a negative ring to it, but niche fashion and really finding your own pocket, both from a designer standpoint and from a consumer standpoint. And
well, we've both been working together and know each other for a long time, to have seen things come and go, from a short length changing to a long length. You always need the yin and the yang. And there is a moment today where everyone wears a hoodie, and that's great. That's the way we dress. I mean, I own endless hoodies for many years, but I also like the opposite. And if it's that one beautiful jacket or pair of shoes in my sea of Nike sneakers, I still look for those things. And I think that's very real and a very modern way to approach fashion.
Let's go back to the concept of the fashion show for a moment. Things have changed so much, and obviously, once upon a time, it was a purely insider exercise or insider activity, and now everyone is streamed, immediately. Are fashion shows still relevant, and what is their role today?
I mean, for me, they're incredibly relevant because nothing replaces you being up close and seeing a model in the piece, how it moves, what it's made out of, and which you miss in online and in a photograph. So yes, I mean, I think it's really important to see what she's wearing.
Agreed. And there's nothing like that, however long, be it 5 minutes or 14 minutes, it doesn't usually go longer than that, being in the moment, being there for that, and that's something that will never be repeated again in that way, exactly.
So yes, I mean, shows are incredibly relevant. It's just today there are so many different types of shows and so many different types of manufacturers and celebrities putting on shows that it lessens the impact of other shows. There's so much of it.
There certainly is. There certainly is.
That was another reason that we decided to show in a more intimate way.
I think it was a very good idea. Your aesthetic, invariably people use descriptives such as architectural, graphic, sharp, yet it's always feminine and very, powerful in its femininity. How do you describe your aesthetic?
Usable.
Oh, that's a good one.
I like usable because, you have to hit all of those things. I think, it has to fit well. It has to be something that you love, not just for a season, but for many seasons, that you save it for your children, that I think those are things that's something that's meaningful to me in design, that it's well made, that it's well designed, that it's...
How do you strike that balance between longevity and currency when you're designing?
I don't, I think for me it's more about the simplicity of useful things are good today and tomorrow. And you always gravitate towards those things, whether it's like, I don't know, a classic cardigan that you have. I have this great Ralph Lauren cardigan that I bought in 1980 something that is just one of my favorite things because it's so beautifully made and so perfect.
Absolutely. You have many things and you go to the same over and over and over. You have your uniform, your personal uniform, but it's also your personal relationship with that item.
Right. But I think that's a tough nut to crack for a designer because we can create whole collections, shoes, bags, run everything in one season. And but when you seduce someone with something really great that they will never ever part with, I think that's a great challenge for any designer.
And that really is so much a part of fashion, isn't it? The seduction element, because it's a truism to say, but it's true. Nobody needs anything. The luxury customer does not need, unless it's that emotional need. I've got to have this. And that is a tough nut to crack, I would imagine.
Especially today, because as we said, there's just so much fashion at all price points.
You love black and white and have used it always and over, yet you have a remarkable color sense. The skirt yesterday with the graphic t-shirt was those colors were, the reds and pinks were a little bit off and so wonderful together. How do you fuse the two, the black and white and then the color?
I don't know, is that me?
Sounds like you. Okay.
I love color. I love black and white. It's always I like black and white because it's always a very you see line and silhouette so much better in black and white. But then color is so exciting. I never try I think when it comes to creating a collection, I buy tons of color and then always choose to show in black and white.
When did you realize that you had something to say as a designer, and how did you develop that voice?
Gee, I don't think that moment's come yet.
Well, that is really important to always feel that you're developing, right? 20 years in, you still have something to say and something new to say and something new to learn, right?
It always feels like the first day, and I say that always at the office, because every collection you get to reinvent yourself, and so much of what I do, I try to evolve from one season to the next, so it's never like abandoning an idea. And we've done collections that, I don't know, started 2 seasons ago that were never right, or ideas that started 2 seasons ago, and then you finally figure it out. And I mean, maybe that's why I'm still engaged after all this time, because it's never about starting completely from scratch. It's always evolving past ideas.
How have your Latin roots influenced your work?
I think, and I think I have a great appreciation for the body, and I see that as being very Latin, fitting, and there's something very, I like to think that it's a celebration of the body, and I think there's something quite romantic and Latin about that. And I remember showing a collection once in South America, and it was a season that was quite pale and soft, and the press was almost like violent because they wanted to know where the red was and where the ruffles were. And I was like, well, that's cliche. You can.
I don't think of you being ruffly.
No.
I mean, every now and then,
but
yeah.
They wanted to see a Latin designer create something that was. When I look at it, I guess it's the femininity in the work that I read as Latin.
Do we have some fashion students here? Okay. I wonder, so many young people come out of school today and immediately want to or do establish their own companies, start with their own names. You didn't. You worked for Donna, you worked for Calvin, you had other experiences. What did you learn in those situations? What did you learn from each? And would you advise people to do that first?
I always tell young people to go out and learn from the people that they admire the most, because it's an experience. I mean, when I was a teenager, I had 2 dreams. One was to go to Parsons, and one was to work with Donna Karan, and I was fortunate that I got to do both. She was a hero. I mean, she was incredible with draping and
How did you become aware of Donna, and what attracted you to her?
Well, at the time, she and Louis Delolio, who was also a brilliant designer and an amazing tailor, were running Anne Klein, and it was back in that day. There were maybe 4 designers: Perry Ellis, Anne Klein, Calvin, and Ralph. It wasn't like today. There were so many brands, and then you had smaller companies like Jeffrey Bean and Blass and Oscar and Tregear, like small companies. So her work was very modern and very, very obviously very about women. And at Parsons, she was a critic. And to see her.
Is that how you met?
Yes. And to see her take every student's project and grab it and make it fit.
You did that. I can see her doing that.
Yeah.
The grab and the fitting, and yeah.
I remember Isaac did a beautiful suit and dress combo, and she just grabbed it by the shoulders from behind, and everything fell into place. And she was magical like that. And the craft has always been the most inspiring part of the process for me. And to see her and how incredibly talented she was with fabric and her hands, and she's very unique. So I mean, she gave me so much, and she often says that she's my mother and Calvin's my father. I'm their baby, and it just gets kind of weird.
I was going to say that. No, I've heard her refer to you as, yeah.
Yeah, but she's amazing, and so.
Wouldn't you love to be at Thanksgiving dinner at that family? Oh my God. Oh my God.
And then, and then Calvin lured me away from Anne Klein, and I didn't really want to go.
So much for friendship, Calvin and Donna, huh?
Well, that was when they weren't friends.
Okay.
But, and she had started her own company by then. And it was such a different experience working at Calvin. Like, it's so much about image and incredible hard work. Like, it's just it was a very different experience. But I was exposed to people and things that I always say was kind of like finishing school, because I met amazing people like Zach Carr. And,
tell people who Zach Carr was.
Zach Carr was a brilliant designer and really the man behind the scenes at Calvin. He was an incredible illustrator, impeccable taste, a real cute Southern sweetheart with a lot of energy and so inspiring. And anyone who worked with him
loved him, right?
Loved him and was better for it, and so I worked with him and Jackie Marshall, who's still a close friend, and she did all the soft dresses. I did all the tailoring. We worked with Zach.
Almost like a couture situation.
Oh,
Flew in the tailor, right? Yeah.
Incredible, and the workrooms were incredible, and I learned so much from those tailors and dressmakers, and those are experiences that I still. That was my schooling. And I think it's so important for young people to have that experience. You miss that when you, and I'm not saying if you feel like you need to do that. I mean, it's worked for people like Jack and Lazaro, and, they, run out of school and they start their business and can be really successful. So that's great. But for me, the experience of working with these titans was, I can't describe it.
You also spent time at Nino Cerruti. And when you were there, you had, I would call it a defining moment. You designed a very, very famous dress that made you very, very famous. It was for Carolyn Bessette, who became Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, and who was a dear friend of yours. Talk about that experience.
Well, it's always,
I know it's emotional for you to talk about.
It was very, it is emotional to speak of her. We were so close. And
did you meet at Calvin?
We met at Calvin. Another great relationship that started at Calvin. But she was my dear friend and was getting married, so I was very happy for her and very excited to make her wedding dress, and never really thought of it as a press event.
Have you all seen pictures of that dress? Do you know what it looks like? Will you describe it? It's the chicest, most simple. It's so beautiful.
It was a white silk crepe bias gown. I mean, it was quite simple.
And she wore her hair back with no veil. She was absolutely gorgeous, and just the bouquet. And anyway, go ahead. And
I made my best friend's wedding dress and went to her wedding, and then the next day everything changed. I wasn't prepared for that kind of change.
Because you had been basically an anonymous backroom designer up until that point. I mean, we knew you in the fashion industry, but your name was not even, to say it wasn't even a household word. I mean, it was a whole different thing back then, right? So there were designer names were much more insider or known to small pockets at the time. Right. Now everyone seems to know about everyone.
Right.
But you were an instant celebrity.
Well, there wasn't social media then.
There was no social media, right. And you were an instant celebrity.
And it was strange because, the day after I returned from her wedding, there was a crowd outside my apartment building trying to get information or interviews or a piece of the dress or a piece of the fabric or anything. And it was just a very invasive, weird situation. And luckily I went back to work in Europe. But even then, it was a lot. It was amazing because...
How was it going back to a job where now you're a star?
Well, it was a lot
awkward?
Of pressure. It was a lot of pressure because, you had awkward situations within the company. you know, all of a sudden people felt like I was more famous than the people who should be famous, or and things like that, which created strange dynamics. And you know, people were trying to steal the pattern and make, you know, I don't know, it was just so odd. And I think it would have been different had it been my company. And
Oh, absolutely,
and
yeah.
I had my own PR team, but there was none of that, and they were so ill prepared for the avalanche of press, and as was I. And I don't. I mean, that photograph was everywhere.
It was everywhere, and it's so remarkable because it was everywhere, and it was a single photograph.
One
You know,
photograph.
it's really, yeah, and it had such resonance.
And for months afterwards, every kiosk in Paris had that photograph, huge. It was a beautiful moment.
Shortly after you went out on your own, did you decide, was it a carpe diem moment? Did you decide, well, it's now or never, now that I have this new profile, or?
I mean, I think it was yes, there was a tremendous amount of press, and I had been approached by different organizations, LVMH, different companies that wanted to hire me for different positions, and you know, I thought the opportunity to work with LVMH at Loewe and do something there was interesting, and at the same time start my own label.
You also, so you started your label, and then while working with your own label, you became part of a wave of American designers in Paris. You went to Loewe, but you showed in Paris. Marc Jacobs was at Vuitton, Michael Kors was at Celine. What was that experience like, working for one of the major, the dominant brand, or the dominant group in fashion? That is still the dominant group in fashion.
It was tough. You know, I always, I mean, I've talked to Michael about it too. I mean, it was hard for us. I mean, we had companies in other countries and responsibilities, and you know, it was a tough thing to work through.
What did you learn from it?
That it wasn't for me. You know.
It wasn't basically the commuting back and forth. It wasn't for you. Was it the whole idea of having to answer up the food chain?
Everything. It was so strange. I mean, I lived out of a bag. I was in. You know, they sort of alluded to the fact that the company was moving to Paris when they hired me, but that never happened.
It remained based in Spain.
In Spain.
Yeah.
So I was going to Madrid, Milan, outside of Milan to.
Was there the samples and production were done in Milan?
No, I was doing
your own stuff in
Milan
Milan.
was my
Okay,
own
okay,
things,
yeah.
and we were showing in Milan at the time, and working on the coast in Italy, and then going to Paris for meetings, and then like 2 weeks later going back to New York, seeing your friends all at one dinner to catch up, and it was just daunting. And I did that for 4 years, and I didn't know who I was anymore, and it was really difficult.
When did you know that it was time not to do it anymore?
You know, you find yourself in situations that aren't healthy, and it wasn't a healthy lifestyle. And I saw how it was affecting other people around me and other designers in that situation. And I said, you know what, you know, your stability, your happiness, your stability, and then Carolyn died. And
During the couture, actually, I remember seeing those headlines.
She would always say to me, you know, Cece, move home, you know, come home. You can just show here.
Do you all know how Carolyn died? You all know that story, right? Okay.
And
I know you're all really young.
you forget, right? It's when things are still so real that it happened so long ago. But you know, I just didn't want to. I don't know. It was a reality check, and I ended that relationship.
You have done something that is incredibly difficult to do. You have stayed independent. How have you done it? You, Dries, Anna Sui, very, very few people achieve that over the long haul.
Well, if you speak to Anna or anybody who's independent, they'll tell you how difficult it is.
Oh, I know, yeah.
It's, I don't know. I mean, everyone's experience is different. It's daunting and challenging.
What are the biggest challenges in it?
Well, when you have things like, when you're independent and you have something like September 11th or the 2008 economic downturn or, retail partners going bankrupt and things like that, those are things that are really damaging to a company that isn't funded by a giant conglomerate where they just move billions of dollars into your account. And it's tough, but we've survived. I also am very fortunate that I created a fragrance about 15 years ago that's been very successful, and
How much freedom has that allotted you, the fragrance?
a tremendous amount of freedom. I mean, it's a great partnership, and it's hugely successul in Europe, in Russia, in the Middle East, and it's very loved, and I love it because it was a design. It was like a design challenge for me, and it was something that I had built myself a little work table in my design studio and experimented. And I've always loved fragrance. It was always a dream of mine to do something like that. So the fact that people love it as much as I loved making it is really sweet and very rewarding, not just financially, but something very meaningful to me.
Our time is slipping away, but I have a couple of other things I want to definitely get to. The red carpet. It's such a topic of conversation, and it's so important, and yet it's such an irritation to so many designers. What is your take on the red carpet? How important is it? Do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I have dressed so many beautiful women and cultivated great relationships and have them as close to your friends, like Juliana Margulies and Claire Janes, and and I love creating special things for them. I never chase the red carpet. I think so much of the problem with the red carpet, and sadly, it's really it's not inspiring anymore to see a red carpet. Because,
why not?
Well, I think you have huge companies who buy these actresses and dress them badly, and they have no choice but to wear the most ridiculous things. And
I just had a conversation with Tom Ford, and he said that it's so frustrating that most of the major actresses have contracts.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. Yeah.
And I'm happy for them, but I'm never happy for them when I see them looking bad, because I wonder, oh, you really chose the money over leaving the house looking like that?
The answer sometimes is yes, but okay. What, after 20 years of your own company, what gets under your skin most about fashion? What do you loathe most about fashion right now?
I don't know. It feels a little bit hollow sometimes. It's much more about, it's more about likes than substance. And I don't know, I've just always been so focused on the substance of it and not the noise.
And what do you love most about it after all these years?
Probably the same thing, because all the silliness makes the substance stand out more, and makes people appreciate you spending late nights trying to figure out how to make that fabric work in a certain way.
Sounds great. And on that note, I will open the floor to questions. Does anyone have a question for Narciso? Yes. Yes. Oh, we have it.
Do I need to say my name too? No, just talk.
You can say
By
your
all
name.
means, say your name.
Well, good morning.
Hi.
My name is Benjamin Adams, so I'll be getting ready for Style Fashion actually later on today. So the question was, when you was a child, who was you inspired by, and why was you inspired by that person? And if you could explain to the audience pretty much, if they inspired by somebody, what does it mean and what does it take to get to the level you are at?
Love that.
A lot of hard work, and perseverance. And, when when I was a kid, I didn't really have the exposure or resources. You know, my family, my parents were immigrants, so you know, what I saw was two very hardworking people, and then magazines that had very inspiring women. And you know, I also was very obsessed with film and style in films, and that was, and my dad's hard work, really. I mean, his perseverance and, you know, his work ethic was like no one's, and I think that they instilled that in me, and they were a huge inspiration for me. And then people like Antonio Lopez, who was a great illustrator, fashion illustrator, and looking at his work in magazines and trying to get a Bloomingdale's shopping bag that he had. He used to do the drawings for the Bloomingdale's shopping bags. Remember those? And like, you know, to get your hands on a shopping bag back then was the most important thing in my life. You know, and then really just, you know, people will always tell you you can't do things. Like, I mean, I think even my parents were so intimidated and freaked out that I wanted a career in fashion or the arts, because it's not a guaranteed kind of a thing, anything that's creative. And they said, no, you can't do that often. You should be a doctor and a lawyer and a million other things. But I just chose to do this. And
When you did, once you showed your resolve, how did they react to it?
well, I kind of lied to them. I told them I was doing, I was going.
First line of defense, lie.
Well, you know, they just, and also back then, I mean, a boy studying fashion, they were like, you want to sew? And like, it was so hard for them to comprehend. So I told them I was painting or something. And
Oh, because really, fine art, that's a real
was
guaranteed career, good
better
guaranteed
than
paycheck.
sewing.
Yeah.
in a Cuban macho household, you know, that's not what sewing is forbidden. But, and then, you know, but even, you know, being told no can be as powerful.
Oh, no, as a parent, being told no can be the absolute best.
Yeah.
If you want, you know, the reverse psychology thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then just, you know, doing the work. Nothing is, there's no better
There's no
thing.
substitute for that. Yeah.
Than doing the work.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, well, I was putting, okay, you and then this young lady in the middle.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm from Dominican Republic. I study at Parsons. And so one of the things that they ask us to do is to find a way to make your fashion say something about you. So I was wondering, what do your concepts and ideas like reflect about you?
You know, I like things, as I was saying, that are kind of usable and logical, and I live like that. I don't, you know, I like things that are, you know, whether it's a sofa for my house or I like things that are...
Not just for show.
Yeah.
The visual's
like
important, but the function is there.
Yeah, but I think that's so true for everything today, no? The way that we shop for food and, you know, that it be really good, you know, and I try to put that into my work as well. Like when I look at materials, or not only when we create one thing for a show, but when we reproduce those things in multiples to go to a store, like I want those things to be made as beautifully as the first one. So we're very meticulous about the construction and the make of things.
Hi, I'm Isabel. I'm from Ecuador.
Hi.
I'm a fashion blogger. I know that may sound cliche, but what is the best advice that you can give us, like a fashion industry, a young fashion industry?
Best advice. It's so simple. You know, work hard. You know, if you have a dream and you believe that what you have to say in fashion, or whether it's, you know, blogging or making a dress, if you believe in what you're doing, then just stick to it, work hard, and don't take no for, you know.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Over here, right here.
My name is Marisol Flamenco from mariestilo.com, and my question is, in 20 years of career, which was the minute that you think that changed your life?
Which was the
The moment that
changed your
changed your life in your career?
I'm really fortunate because I've had great experiences, whether it was Michelle Obama on an election night, but really I think it was Carolyn Bessette's wedding to John Kennedy really brought a lot of attention to the work that I was doing in Paris. I mean, from a visibility standpoint.
But I think maybe you could also address, Narciso, how sometimes that kind of instant fame can be great in the moment, but have long-term negative effects. Like you really dealt with it after you said it was a lot to deal with, but you really did deal with it, and then focus in on building your brand and building your company. And
Well, I remember when that happened. Like
Yeah.
so many. I was showing in Paris, and people would come to the show. You know, it was a nice crowd. But after that dress, it was crowds of people fighting to get in the door. And I think everybody expected to see wedding gowns, and I just went back to doing my work, you know, and I didn't want to change, and I just focused on the work that I was doing.
I think a young lady here had a question. Do you have a question? Yes.
Yes, hi. Oh, thank you. Hello, good morning.
Hi.
My name is Stephanie Andujar. My sister's name is Melanie, and she's a fashion designer. I model like her clothes and stuff, and I sew them too. But anyway, so I love sewing. You know, you mentioned that earlier. But she wanted to know, or I wanted to know too, was it challenging to go from clothing to then making a fragrance? Was that part challenging? Because we're not afraid of no hard work. We're Latinas, so we're Latinos, so we know.
Well, it's all hard work, and I think I think if you're passionate about anything, whether it's designing your house or furniture or clothing or fragrance, and you want to do these things, then yeah, I mean, I don't ever think about it as hard work. I think about it as this is what you see, and this is what you have to do to get to that point. So it's different. It was very different. I mean, you work with when you work on making a dress in the sample room, you can give somebody a sketch. You could put a piece of fabric on it. You could tell them how you want it. You can show it, drape it on a mannequin. You can make it. Fragrance was very different because I can say to you, I want something that smells sweet, and what's sweet to me is completely different to you. So it's a very abstract kind of way of working.
No, so it's also an abstract concept to try to express a visual aesthetic in a fragrance. Obviously, you have the bottle. That's also a visual expression. But how did you do that? What made you think about, okay, this is the scent that will somehow represent, my aesthetic going forward? Because I mean, obviously, a fragrance has to last.
Well, I was a kid. I was always obsessed with fragrance, and I would make things.
Really?
I would put like bold.
Your little concoctions, really?
There were scary things growing under my bed all the time, and it was something that I really enjoyed doing. It, and there were certain ingredients that I loved, and I don't know. I just, it was happening at the same time as I was doing my fashion work, but I think any designer always dreams of having a fragrance.
Oh yeah.
I think it's a very beautiful way to get across your aesthetic and your message, and it's very romantic. It's a fun.
And it can be very worthwhile in a bottom line sense.
Yes.
Yes,
and-
right. It can really
and
help.
For a company,
Yeah.
it can be very rewarding as well. Yeah.
Any other questions for Narciso? Yes. Right. The two of you. Well, so whoever goes first, does, yeah.
My name is Nina, and I have a question. What are your guilty pleasures, and do you watch Project Runaway, maybe, by any chance?
What are my guilty pleasures? Ice cream, obviously. No, I don't. I mean, I don't really spend a great deal of time watching television shows. So I've watched Project Runway when it first started. It was really fun.
You perhaps have less time on your hands now than you did a little while, 8 months ago, right?
Yes, yeah. There's also that.
You know, new dad doesn't have a lot of time for those pursuits. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Maria, and I just want to know what's the biggest challenge that you have encountered in launching your own brand?
You know, so many, you know, everything from like partnerships, finding the right people to work with can be a difficult experience, trusting the right people. I think that was really hard for me, and just, I mean,
When you say trusting, I mean, we've both been doing this a long time, and we've seen bad relationships, bad business deals really destroy people.
Yes.
That's, how do you know? How do you, I mean, when you're young, when you're not so young, you don't necessarily know. How can you judge what's right?
Well, you know, you have to find good advisors and surround yourself with, you know, whether it's a parent or friends, that people who have experience, who know more than you do, who can, you know, help you make decisions. You know, I think that's I think that's so important. You see people like Domenico De Sola and Tom Ford, or
that is a relationship that really has,
and I don't know, Pierre Berger and Saint Laurent, and people who've had great partnerships and advisors.
those are very, very special partnerships. I mean, those are very rare.
Or backers, or you know, it's because it's not just about you, it's about your team, you know, and that can be, I mean, Robert and
Mark,
Mark for so many years. And
anybody else, another question? Right up here? Yes.
Hi, I'm Astrid. It's an honor to be here amongst my classmates from LIM College. You mentioned the lack of online platforms when you were first recognized. I just want to know how you stayed relevant with the rise in social media.
Well, I love to be engaged in every way. I mean, we're who isn't engaged today and constantly looking at what's happening on Instagram or any social media now. It's just it was so different when we started out, because you depended on press and press relationships, and now you can just show online, you can show.
How do you engage social media for the brand?
How? In every way possible. I mean, we've cultivated relationships with bloggers. Everybody in the office is constantly on Instagram.
I think we have time for one more question. Right there.
Hi, I'm Tahira.
Hi.
And I have sort of a two-part question. First, I wanted to ask if you've ever experienced a design block and how you overcame that. And then my second question is with regards to burnout, specifically like the fast-paced production that something like Fashion Week would require. And, you know, consumers looking for like immediate gratification. How do you work with that?
So it's 3 questions. Right? How do I deal with burnout?
Okay.
Was the first
Okay.
one?
First was
If you've ever experienced a design block.
Design
That's
block,
good,
every day. You know, I mean, since I was like 20, I was saying, it's over, I can't do this. But yeah, I mean, you always go through periods that are more rich and periods that are more dry. It's very natural. But I don't know, you just
And yet you have to keep to the schedule.
Yeah.
So how do you work through that when you're not feeling particularly creative, but there's a show and, you know?
I really don't give myself that luxury of stopping to say, oh, I can't do this. You know, we have to do it, and we go forward. And yeah.
What was the other part of the question?
And then I was just wondering, like, when production, how does it affect production when you're in situations like Fashion Week, when consumers are looking for like that immediate gratification?
They have to wait. We have to, it's funny. I mean, you still need the same amount of time to reproduce things and deliver things, and it takes an army of people to do these things, and there are always glitches, like fabric is always late, deliveries get lost, any number of things.
I mean, what was it, a year ago now or 3 seasons ago, we had the experiment with Buy Now, Wear Now that basically didn't work at the luxury level. Can you explain why it didn't work? I mean, it may in fact be the wave of the future, but so much has to align. So can you explain a little bit about why it didn't work?
I honestly don't know why it didn't work. I mean, I know so many people invested so much into that, and I thought it was a good idea as well, because, I mean, Donna had tried it many years ago.
Donna was really ahead of the curve on that whole.
But it really hurt her business.
Yeah.
And I think there's, I think what's difficult now is on social media you can see something and you want it then, and then 3 to 5 months later when it's in the store you may want something else. But I think that's more of a disconnect there.
And that's something will be continued to grapple with.
Yes.
One final question. How has becoming a father changed your approach or altered your approach to work, if it has at all, or your overall perspective?
I've learned to delegate more.
20 years in, learning to delegate, right?
But, I just edit and focus. And I think it's not just because I'm a father. I think it's very pertinent to the times. It's the way we live. I mean, I don't want a lot of stuff. I don't need to create, 100 and whatever piece collection. Nobody needs that much stuff. We need to make less that's better, and live like that.
Narciso, thank you. That's a great way to finish. Thank you so much. And thank all of you. And I love your questions. You're really, really good and astute. And I think many of you have sort of, if fashion design doesn't and you choose to go another way, you could be fashion journalists. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.